Now, if you want to ask why on earth the U.S. would attack Iraq, you've got me, because Iraq posed no threat to the United States. It was not in the United States' interest to bomb Iraq. Why else do it? Again, we have to understand that the United States government, especially since Clinton, has been populated by people who owe more of an allegiance to Israel than to the United States itself. To this day, there are people in the American government who are citizens of Israel. And to have a dual citizen formally policy really brings up questions of duplicity, treason, the very sort of concerns that Jews had before 1967. But these don't matter anymore. It is impossible to believe that a republic could commit suicide by passing the Patriot Act. But it makes more sense to believe that Israel, the United States Congress, is not in control of itself. The people making policy would rather serve Israel than serve their own public. I mean, why else would we, with George W. Bush, veto a bill for $30 billion for child insurance, yet write a blank check to bomb Arabs into oblivion? Why terrorize and torture people for no good purpose? I mean, if you want Iraq to supply oil, you don't make the climate so untenable that oil becomes impossible to export. There is direct contradiction between traditional oil policy, as practiced up until the mid-'80s, and oil policy under Bush. And it's important to realize that if we're going to have a discussion about what happened on September the 11th and other such things, we have to look at who benefited from it. The Patriot Act, in my view, represents the culminating act of the fascist coup d'etat that happened in 1980. Now, it was a coup d'etat that happened with the willingness and support of the American public. Because after all, if the liberal Eastern establishment could bring the country to such disgrace in Vietnam, then perhaps it's time we put our faith in people who didn't really think for a living. Put our faith in people who thought of religion, people who told us what we wanted to hear, people who were less intellectual than they were jingoistic and rah-rah, energetic Americans. Ronald Reagan had no business being president, but he spoke to the need of Americans to feel good about themselves. Because both the Republicans and Democrats have been so irredeemably tainted by the war. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution tainted the Johnson administration. The secret bombing of Cambodia and the Watergate cover-up destroyed the Republican credibility. And so they put their faith in people who told them what they wanted to hear and essentially consigned the country to people who did not know what they were doing and had objectives other than that serve the interests of the American people. I mean, to this day, the United States has something called the Strategic Oil Reserve Agreement with Israel, under which it will guarantee to supply Israel with oil in the event of a crisis, even to the extent of denying oil to its own people. The United States has been humiliated, abused, disgraced, internationally and domestically, as it moves to support Israel in whatever it does. And it is impossible to think that this is being done willingly, that the United States is the same country that existed in the 1960s and 70s. The only possible thing that we can conclude is that the United States has been under Israeli occupation to all intents and purposes. I think that's hilarious. Well, okay. Well, I'll be finished in a minute. The only way to understand the last 8 years is that it's a culmination of a number of things that happened in the United States that I articulate in my book here, and shows how the United States slowly and quite clearly allowed itself to be occupied and humiliated by a lobby that had at its primary interest the interests of another government. Because